Hi everybody, welcome to another video on Beyond Blender, and we'll be making this object here today. So it's basically a cylinder shape with a hole cut into it. I'm going to isolate that to show you that in a little bit more detail. Let me switch to solid mode. And as I said, it's a cylindrical shape. It can be any shape that you like, of course, and likewise it can be any shape within that shape that is making the hole. And if you prefer, I started this one as an SVG file. You don't have to do that, of course. You can create this shape or any other shape yourself manually in Blender using a plane or a single vertex and just draw the shape manually. And there you go, use that as your starting point. Let me quickly show you around what the final object looks like in terms of its topology. So I want to tap into edit mode. So you can see it's pretty straightforward. There are some additional cuts here that I just did for testing mostly. And we've got some a few n-gons here and there, nothing to worry about if they're on a flat surface. And the reason being, if you're not going to deform this shape, then it doesn't matter if you have n-gons, as long as you have supporting edge loops running around any edges, like leading edges like this one here. And speaking of leading edges, the bevel on the outer side, if I tap back to object mode, you can see we have a nice bevel there, and that's using the mean bevel weight targeting. So we apply a value of 1 to these edges that are shown in blue, and using a bevel modifier you can target those using the weight method, not the default angle method. Okay, so we also have half the model made, and using a mirror modifier, of course, to finish up off for us. So as I mentioned, with the bevel modifier, and then finally the subdivision modifier, just to smooth things off as you like. So let's have a look at doing this. Okay, before we jump into Blender, I made a note of the steps that I took to create the shape I just showed you. So we'll start from the top, and I started with an SVG file. As I said, you don't need to start with that. You can just create your own shape or download an SVG file off the internet somewhere. Second step is to get that into, well, the first step is to get that into Blender, of course. And then once we have that there, we can reduce the resolution of that SVG. And I've said curve here because an SVG in Blender becomes a curve object. So basically that's to simplify the curve as much as we can, but maintain the overall shape. Third step is to extract the shape profile, so the overall shape itself, and get rid of the internal topology. We don't need that, and I'll show you why. The next step is redistribute vertices using LoopTools. LoopTools, if you're not aware, comes built with shipped with Blender. It's built in. Just head over to Preferences, Add-ons, and search for LoopTools and enable it. And in the LoopTools, we'll be using the space action, which means basically space stuff out. The next step is to create the outer circular shape. It doesn't have to be a circle, it can be a diamond, a square, whatever shape you like, and hexagon or whatever. And we can use a circle, a primitive circle for that, even a cylinder if we really need to, or we can use the actual shape itself in combination with LoopTools. The next step is to fill the profiles with faces, and following that we can then add a mirror modifier, add an inset and some boundary loops, add some bevels, and the other modifiers that I showed you a moment ago. Let's make a start. Okay, so here's the SVG file that I have got prepared for this demonstration. It's a very basic shape, just a puzzle piece. And again, you can use any shape you like. So I'm just going to close that. So going back to our list, our first step is to actually import the SVG. So to do that, head over to File, Import, SVG, Scalable Vector Graphics. And then I'll navigate to that SVG file, which I've saved there, and import SVG. And there it is in the center of our world. And by the way, if your 3D cursor is somewhere else in your scene, you'll obviously put it there as its origin. I digress. Right, so the first thing I'm going to do is right click and set the origin to geometry. So the pivot point of that object is in the center. And then I'm going to head over to the location information and just reset that back to 0. So we have it in the middle of our world. Right, so the next step is to adjust this the curve information. As you can see, it's a curve object, it's put it in a collection. I've got a previous one, that's why it's called .001. So here's our curve object. And if we head over to our curve properties down here, we can see we have a resolution preview, which is set to 12 at the moment. And if I turn on the wireframe, we should be able to see the actual topology if this were a mesh object. And to show the wireframe, you can click on this drop down here, select wireframe there. If you have my add-on VB Toolkit Pro, this is not available in free, you can just click the wireframe button there and I'll do the same thing. So yeah, let's go back to that. So as you can see, this is quite common for SVG files. They look nice and clean. When you bring them into a 3D package, they can be quite messy, and this is pretty bad topology. So if you ever get that in your models, you may want to look at retopologizing. So anyway, let's get this resolution down to a more manageable, workable file, I should say. So you can see we have a lot of lines going across left. I think I moved that. I did. Let's put it back. We've got a lot of lines going across vertices and edges. So let's reduce that by lowering this number here. And I'm going to switch the top view, 7 on the numpad. And I can clearly now see that we have a lot less resolution and not as many vertices to work with, which is pretty good because it makes our life a lot easier. So top tip, always keep it as simple as possible. Keep it simple, as they say. So I'm going to keep it at 4. Use any resolution that works for you in your shape. And with that done, we need to convert that to a mesh. So select the object and you can press F3 to search for that. The first option should be convert to mesh. If it's not there, then head over to object, or if you don't see that, head over to object, and about just over halfway down, you have the convert option there, and you can see mesh. So let's select that. You can see our curve is now a mesh, has a mesh icon next to it. If we tab into edit mode, like every other object, we have edges, vertices, and faces. But once again, these aren't very nice. So next I'll show you how to extract the profile from this, because we don't need all of the interior faces. Okay, let's tidy this up. So all we need now is the profile of the shape. We'll just want the outside. But because this is an SVG, we do have some weird anomalies going on. We've got lots of triangles and poles. So if I do an Alt click, which is the normal way you would select an edge loop, and I sometimes recommend that you don't click directly on the edge. You don't have to click at that. You can click anywhere near an edge to select that edge loop. So you can see if I Alt click here, it doesn't always select. Oh, it did that time. That's interesting. I've done this about 4 times. That's the first time it selected everything. So I'm going to go with that. Why not? If it doesn't do that and you end up with something like this, which is a bit odd, you can just keep adding to the selection by holding down Shift and Alt, like so. Just click anywhere near these larger edges to make the selection bigger. And I think that's everything, but you can't really always see it as clearly as you might want to see it. There we go. It's actually easier there. So anyway, that's the profile shape selected, and we want to copy that. We don't need everything else. So to copy in Blender, it's Shift D. And as I do that, the object that or the elements that I've copied become attached to your mouse. And if you move your mouse, they go everywhere. So to stop that, just right click, and to leave it in its place of origin. Now, before you click away, it's important to remember that this is inside this one object. So don't click away with that still selected. And when you just copied, press the P key, P for separate, I don't know, and select selection. And now you can see under this collection, we've got curve 1 and curve 2. So let's tab to object mode. And there's our original SVG that we converted to a mesh. Don't actually need that, so I'm going to delete it. I'll delete it, but make sure you maybe keep a copy of that as a backup just in case. So you can see that I've got a backups folder where I've been testing stuff. So just hide that, turn it off, and drop your copies into there. Cool. The next step is to inspect the mesh that we've got extracted and perhaps tidy it up. So we'll do that next. Okay, let's tidy up our edge loop. So I'm going to tab into edit mode. And you can see there, I'm going to switch over to vertex mode. And once we do that, you can see the number of vertices we've got to work with. So at this point, you can either leave it like this, or you could actually, on all the straight lines or the straight areas, you can go in and delete some of these extra vertices. You may not need them. It's unlikely that you will. Doesn't hurt to leave them in there, of course. But if you wanted to, be extra tidy, you can go and remove these and keep it much, much simpler. For the sake of this, why don't I just get rid of a few and I'll show you how to do that. So I'm going to, switch over to select box selection method and just pick the ones that are in between in the straight lines. So maybe these ones here and these ones. I'm holding down Shift, by the way, to make more selections, to add to their selection. So we've got those selected. Oh, I missed one there. Oops. There we go. And to delete those, you can press the delete key. And you don't want to delete the vertices, because if you did that, you'd leave holes and gaps everywhere. So I'm going to undo that. Instead, when you press delete, you want to dissolve them. Okay? The same thing can be done by, if I undo that one more time, I can do the same thing by dissolving my selection by doing Control Delete. Just like that. Cool. So now we've tidied that up. The next step is going to involve LoopTools, which is built into Blender. So head over to Preferences, Add-ons. In the search box, type in Loop, and LoopTools should be there. If it's not ticked, give it a tick, and you're good to go. So LoopTools gives you some really cool functions. And you can access LoopTools by right-clicking, and it should be here, either at the top or the third one down. Or you can also find it in the Edit tab, just on the side there. So I'm going to use the right-click method. And the reason I want to use that is, if you look at these areas here, you have quite a some gaps are larger than others between the vertices. I understand you need more detail in the bends, but I'm not really that bothered because we're going to add a subdivision modifier anyway. So what I want to do is I want to space these out evenly. So I'm going to box select all of these and then right click, LoopTools and space. You can see that's now spaced those out in a neater fashion. Let's do the same for these. So box select, right click, LoopTools, space. And there you go. Make sure you save your file in case, you never know. And the next step, if I bring my notes up again. So we've done that. And the next step is to create the outer circle shape or whatever shape you want to, be the base, the whole shape basically, the larger overall shape. So to do that, there's two ways you can do that. You can either add a circle or a square using the add-on, using the free version as well, or the pro version, or you can do the usual Shift-A, mesh, plane, or circle, or cylinder, or other shape that you want to create yourself. One other method is to actually use the same shape that we have here. So I'll just show you how to do that. I'm going to switch to top view and tab into edit mode and select all of these edges. So I'm going to press 2 to get into edge mode. Just press the A key to select everything, and then Shift D to duplicate those. Right click to snap and leave them in place. And then press S for scale. And just bring it out a little bit so we can see it nice and clearly. Now you might think that is, really messy. How we're going to get that into a circle? If I select that edge loop again by clicking Alt click, this is where LoopTools comes in again. So with that selected, I can right click, LoopTools and do circle. switch over to the top view, and I'm going to tab into edit mode, which I already am actually, sorry, I should, on vertex mode I mean. And LoopTools not only made it a circle, but it also distributed the vertices so they're nicely spaced out as well. All that we need to do now is decide on how large we want our overall shape to be. So I'll go with something like that. Cool. So now we have the profiles there. And of course, we're in solid mode, but we don't actually have any geometry. So we need to give this some body, right? Some faces, some topology. So to do that, you'd be tempted, maybe if you're already aware, that you can select edge loops in Blender and you can bridge between them. If I right click and do bridge edge loops, it kind of works, but it doesn't work everywhere. And the reason for that is because the shape goes in on itself. It's got maybe negative space, if you like, so it can't traverse this gap in an intelligent way. And the reason for that, I'm going to undo, Control Z. And the reason for that is simply because we have all these open loops that Blender needs a little bit more, help to understand how to make these cuts or loops, bridge edge loops. Having said that, if we make sections within these profiles to help Blender out, we can't do the bridge edge loops. We're going to have to manually fill the sections that we create. But that's not a problem. It's actually quite easy. So I'll show you that in the next step. Okay, let's create these sections. So I'm in edit mode. I'm going to go to vertex selection mode, and I'm going to switch to the top view, 7 on the numpad. In fact, let me just turn on my keys program, because that way you can see what I'm pressing. I'm going to use yet another key displayer. That seems to work quite well. Put that on the second screen. So yeah, that's working. So all we need to do now is make a few, I say cuts, but we haven't got anything to cut. We're going to add some new edges to these profiles. And to do that, go into vertex mode and just make 2 vertex selections on opposite sides. And to connect these, it's not the J key, because that only works with existing faces where you have geometry, and we don't have any geometry. So select those and press the F key. F for face or fill, and that will fill between those 2 vertices. And we now have, if I use the edge mode, we've got a new edge created. So that'll be a nice sensible cut there to start off with. So let's do the same up here where all of these rounded parts are. So I'm going to press F. And let's make one here. F. Remember, these bits are holes, so we don't want to put edges here, between these 2. We want to keep those open. So I'm going to go do the same here. Press F, and make these ones here as well. Why not? Because they're pretty straightforward. So let me just rush through this. Now the tricky part is going to be these ones here, where they kind of go in and then come out again, or out and in. So this will still be okay. So I'm going to leave it like that for now. That should be fine. We'll see what happens. We can always undo and make some more cuts. Cool. So let's fill these now with actual faces. So to do that, I'm going to go into edge mode, and we want to, now that we've got clear defined sections to our profiles, we can go and select these faces here, or not faces, edges within that section. But you can see we have quite a few edges, so you don't want to do that manually one by one. You can do, but it's a bit boring, a bit of a long-winded way to do it. So if you're not familiar with the brush selection tool in Blender, you can invoke that by pressing the C for Charlie key. So press C, and you have now a circular overlay on your mouse pointer. And if you scroll your mouse wheel, you can change that brush size. So now to make a selection, just click and drag and just basically brush your selection like that. If you make too much of a selection, maybe you go over like this, So what you can do is press the middle mouse button or the mouse wheel and then just brush that out. Okay, so middle mouse button will deselect and then just left mouse button to select. Now to get back to your normal operation, just right click to break out of the selection brush. So as you can see, we've got this lovely section here. It's highlighted, selected, it's a closed loop, and I'm going to press F to create a face. That's worked really well. We've got a nice N-gon there. No issues that I can see with that at all. So let's make our way around the rest of the object, making these fills. And I've actually made a mistake there, which I said I wouldn't do earlier. So that should be an open area. So I'm going to select these two edges, press delete and delete edges. So let me go back to our selection brush with C and let's select these. It might help to zoom in a little bit. Then press the F key. Marvelous, look at that. I'm going to zoom in a bit here and I'll probably do a jump cut to the next part because this will take a second to do, about a minute. So I'll see you in a second.
A few minutes later.
There we go, all done. I filled all of the profile as needed, and now we have all these large N-gons. But it does look fine, so it shouldn't be a problem. And the next step is head over to our breakdown. We've done that, we've filled the profiles with faces, and let's now add a mirror modifier. So if we did that, and you can do that if you have my add-on, you can use the mirror modifier there. So we go to, let's just go to object mode while we're there. Select object, not cursor, Z axis to go up and down, and let's click add. And all that's going to do is add a mirror modifier, of course, on the Z axis. Now nothing's really happened, we don't have any thickness, and the reason for that is because this is at, the pivot point for this object is right in the center of this shape. So we need to move the pivot point or the geometry. So I'm going to choose to move the geometry. So to do that, I'm going to switch over to front view by pressing 1 on the numpad. Then I'm going to tab into edit mode. You can barely see it, but we're in edit mode now. I'm going to switch to vertex mode so we can see that we are in edit mode. Front view, I'm going to press A to select everything. And then using the move tool, I'm going to move that up. So this is a good way of making it any thickness that you like. And with that done, if you're happy with that thickness, we can just leave that and make sure you turn clipping on as well, because that will come into play in the next step. Okay. And speaking of next step, so we've done this and we need to add an inset and boundary loops as well. And before we do that though, let's just complete these inner and outer edges and make it a complete shape. So to do that, we want to use the edge selection mode, and you can alt click on these edges here. Let's just do it like that. I'll just click near them. So that's the inside one selected, and I'm going to select the outer one as well. Like that. Once you have that, press E to extrude, and that will go in every direction as it follows your mouse. We want to lock that to the Z axis. So press the Z key and move your mouse downwards so it clips to the middle. And it will clip to the middle because we have clipping on. If you don't have that, it will just go up and down infinitely. So let's click away from that, and you can see, let's turn wireframe off. Again, wireframe is there. And you can see we have a closed shape now. And whilst we're here, let's do right click and shade smooth. And now it looks pretty bad. But don't worry, that's okay. The reason for that is because we don't have any support loops, which is a great way to take you to the next point. So this is where we add the inset and boundary loops. So this will help us with the shading, but also control the bevel and also the subdivision modifier. And these are really important as a good best practice really when you're modeling in Blender or any other 3D package. So next I'll show you how to do that.